Bonsoir. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The people of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Tonight's virtual meeting will provide the community an opportunity to listen to presentations and provide input on a proposed development of an 8-story mixed-use building at 47 Beechwood Avenue. As you might know, the proposed building will have 4 commercial units on the ground floor, and 121 residential units are also being proposed and would be provided in the range of size from studio to 3-bedroom apartments. The principal access to the residential units will be provided off Springfield Road and Douglas Avenue. Access to commercial units is provided off Beechwood Avenue. According to the proposed plan, 30 secure underground motor vehicle parking spaces are provided for residents. 18 retail and visitor parking spaces are provided with access off Springfield Road. Bicycle parking spaces are provided at building entrances along Beechwood Avenue and within the building on the ground level. A drop-off space and loading area under a cantilevered portion of the building will be accessed via a driveway off Douglas Avenue. And the proposal also talks about walkways from Springfield Road, Beechwood Avenue, and Douglas Avenue, which are proposed on the west, south, and east property lines. Members of the applicant team are here with us this evening, along with a member from the city's planning staff and the executive director of the Vanier BIA, which exercises responsibility over Beechwood as a traditional main street within our catchment area. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank my colleague, Rideau Vanier, Councillor Stephanie Plante, who might as well drop in during this session. And we want to remind everyone before we continue that this session is being recorded and will be ultimately placed on my YouTube channel for information. So if you would rather not appear, please ensure that you keep your camera off. And at this time, I will ask members of the applicant team to introduce themselves.
So my name is Arjun Soor. I'm with Novatech, and we are acting as the planners for the applicant for 47 Beechwood.
And I'm with Arjan. My name is Murray Chown. I'm the Director of Planning and Development at Novatech, and Arjan's my file lead on this application. And then with us, I guess, Ryan, you can introduce yourself.
Sure thing. So I'm Ryan Coolwine. I'm the principal at Project One Studio. We are the architects for the project.
Thank you so much. I believe that's the applicant team. And then we also have a member of city staff in the planning department. So I'll let Andrew introduce himself.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see such a good turnout for this information session. So my name's Andrew McCrate. I'm the manager of Development Review Central. That we're the team on the city side who's processing the planning applications that we're speaking about tonight. And later on, I'll give you a brief overview of the process for zoning amendments and site plan applications. So nice to meet everyone.
Thank you. And we also have the executive director of our local BIA.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Hello. I'm sorry I'm joining you from a rink, but I will be listening attentively.
Us. Just wanted to just briefly run through some of the meeting guidelines. So we're utilizing muted entry this evening, so everyone joins on mute to minimize background noise. During the question period, please use the raise hand icon if you'd like to speak. Once again, just a reminder that we are recording this meeting. So to reduce lag and also for privacy, like I had stated before, feel free to keep your video off if you prefer. And we also will encourage participation by chat. So please feel free to use the chat feature. In fact, we encourage it for you to share questions or comments in the chat as we go along, especially during the presentations. The agenda will begin with the applicant's team presentation, followed by a brief overview from the city's planning department on the planning process, as well as a brief from the BIA. That planning staff will only address questions on the process itself, not opinions on the specific application at this time. The presentations that are going to be provided by the applicant team, the city planning staff, and the BIA will also be very succinct, so that we can maximize time for residents' questions and comments, and also to ensure that we can conclude that this meeting ends at 8 p.m. sharp. So we've set a large portion of time aside for questions and comments at the end. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us, and let us begin with the applicant team's presentation.
Sure, so we'd be happy to go first. I don't know, Andrew, if you wanted to, if your preference is to go first, you can go ahead, but if not, I think I'll begin by presenting sort of the planning side of things. So Andrew, would you prefer to go first, or?
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Arjun. I'll follow you.
Okay. So let me just share my screen. So can everyone see my screen? You should be able to see the presentation slides.
We can.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this community meeting. My name is Arjun Soor. I've already introduced myself, but my name is Arjun Soor. I'm a planner at Novatech. I'm here with my colleague Murray Chown and our project architect Ryan Coolwine from Project One Studio. And we'll be presenting the proposal for 47 Beechwood Avenue. So just to give a bit of context, the subject site is located on the north side of Beechwood Avenue, across the street from the Metro grocery store, and east of another 8-story mixed-use building on the north side of Beechwood. The subject site is currently developed with 6 different businesses, and the map in front of you shows some nearby uses on the left-hand side, and the proximity of public transit service with 300, 600, and 900 meter radii on the right-hand side. So the subject site is within the inner urban transect. The intended pattern of built form site design and mix of uses in the inner urban transect is urban. Section 5.2.1, policy 3 of the official plan, which you see on the slide in front of you, states that the inner urban transect is generally planned for mid to high density development, subject to the proximity and access to frequent street transit or rapid transit, and limits on building heights and massing as per the underlying functional designation. So the subject site is located close to frequent transit service, as you would have seen on the map and the slide before. The underlying designation is Main Street Corridor, which we'll go on to discuss in the next slides. Just to touch on what the official plan identifies as urban characteristics. So some urban characteristics are identified on Section 5, Table 6, as including things like shallow front yard setbacks, principal entrances at grade with a direct relationship to the public realm, a minimum of 2 stories, building with minimal side yard setbacks, small formal areas of landscape that include space for soft landscape, trees, and hard surfacing, and limited parking that is concealed from the street. The proposed development, as you'll see in Ryan Coolwine's presentation, exhibits many of these urban characteristics. So the subject site is designated Main Street Corridor within the inner urban transect. Main Street corridors within the inner urban transect are designated as areas where increased residential growth and mixed-use development is to be accommodated. Section 5.2.3, Policy 2 of the official plan which you see on the slide before you, states that along main streets, permitted building heights are as follows, subject to appropriate height transition, step, exit, angular planes. On sites that front on segments of streets whose right-of-way is narrower than 30 meters, generally up to 9 stories, except where a secondary plan or area-specific policy identifies different heights. So the subject site is along a portion of Beechwood, as you can sort of see on the top of the slide in front of you. The subject site's along a part of Beechwood that is designated Main Street corridor. And the Beechwood Avenue right-of-way is less than 30 meters in width, which means that a building height of up to 9 stories is generally permitted. And proposed development of an 8-story mixed-use building clearly aligns with this direction in the official plan. So on this image, you see the renderings of the property along Beechwood and along Douglas. So the subject site, as I said, is designated Main Street corridor, which permits up to 9 stories. Section 6.2.1, policy 2 of the official plan states that development within a corridor designation shall establish the maximum permitted building heights and highest densities closest to the corridor, and that appropriate transitions in height, use of land, site design, and development character through the site where the corridor designation meets abutting designations shall be ensured. Section 6.2.1, policy 3 of the official plan goes on to say that corridors will generally permit residential uses and non-residential uses that integrate with a dense mixed-use urban environment. And again, as Ryan Coolwine will get into more in his presentation, this development does provide a transition between the taller buildings located to the west and low-rise buildings located to the east along Beechwood Avenue. An adequate transition is also provided from the properties to the north, which are also subject to the evolving neighborhoods overlay. So the subject site, this is an image from the Beechwood community design plan. The site is located within the McKay Main Street area of the Beechwood community design plan. Section 2.2.1 of the Beechwood community design plan states that new buildings should be high quality mid-rise mixed-use buildings with small stores at grade. So this slide shows the proposed development, the site plan for the proposed development. And again, as Ryan's going to get into a little bit more, the development is to construct a 8-story mid-rise mixed-use apartment building with 123 residential units and 4 commercial units at grade. And again, Ryan will provide some more details and some renderings for you to look at for the building. What I want to emphasize here is that the project conforms to the official plan and is designed to align with the official plan policy context that I've set out for you for the subject site. Again, the property is designated Main Street corridor in the urban transect, in the inner urban transect. The official plan anticipates that the subject site would be developed with a mixed-use mid-rise building of up to 9 stories, which exhibits urban characteristics. As Ryan's presentation is going to demonstrate, that is exactly what the proposed development does. And so the proposed development aligns with the policy direction of the official plan. So I want to pass it on to Ryan now, so I'll stop sharing.
Perfect. All right, my turn. So everybody can see my screen okay? Yes?
I don't see
Okay.
anything.
Now?
It's loading, but yeah, there you go.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you for that, Arjan. So there's a great deal of complexity with this site. And this is a project that we were very excited to have the opportunity to work on. There's basically the culmination or the number of intersections and different planes, the different levels of complexity that we can have come together with a project. Basically, everything that could be complex is complex with this project, and we basically check every box possible. We like difficult challenges, so this really resonates with us. We do a lot of infill work and we're specialists with multi-unit residential. We believe deeply in the positive influence that design can have, not only on the people that live in these projects, but also the surrounding communities, and we take this responsibility very seriously as design professionals. This project is of particular relevance to me because I'm actually a resident of the ward, so Manor Park resident. So I know this neighborhood very well. I'm at that metro more often than I'd like to admit. So this really is a chance to make a mark and work on a project that's going to have a direct impact on my day-to-day as well, which is always that much more fun. So when we look at the site and we see, the number of developments recent developments that have been completed. So we've got St. Charles Market, we've got 88 Beechwood that's recently been completed. There's Claridge's project that may happen at some point. We've already completed a low-rise building at 4 Champlain. So we're well aware of the trend and the energy and the momentum that's being built for the neighborhood. And so having the opportunity to work on this site in particular was extremely interesting for us. Now, we do need to take stock of what's there right now, and the positives are that we have, thriving businesses that contribute quite nicely to the community, but at the same time, they're housed in structures that are nearing the end of their functional life cycle. For quite a bit of, while the presence of what they offer as an asset to the community is great, what they do in terms of the urban design, the public realm, is actually quite detrimental to the neighborhood. So buildings that are set very close to corners that are then not about pedestrians and not about circulation space and can't be celebrated, but are very much about negotiating very tight corners that have safety concerns. When we look at the existing storefronts that we've got, these are stairs and buildings that are in various states of repair, that are inaccessible. We've got ceiling heights in these businesses that are quite a bit below what we would consider optimal, very much suboptimal. And the general characteristic of these gaps in between buildings is surface parking. These aren't really directed towards pedestrian use. And while I do make note of a number of these businesses making use of surface parking areas to provide outdoor space, that's a cue that we've used towards how we move forward with the project. But the general sense that we get as we walk past these buildings and past this part of the neighborhood is, buildings that are certainly past their foreseeable lifespan, and then surrounded by areas of asphalt that aren't really geared towards engagement or the pedestrian realm. So looking at this from above, we can see in these red boxes here just how far beyond the property line these existing buildings extend. And then not only do the buildings extend, but they also have stairs and porches in front. So there is not a single building of these commercial residents that face Springfield and face Beechwood that actually meet any of the code requirements for being barrier-free accessible. And while the building on the corner here does have a ramp, that ramp is far too steep to be considered barrier-free or to providing proper barrier-free access. And so this is another pretty big challenge here in terms of the commercial space that is being offered, is that it's being offered to the able-bodied and able-bodied alone, which isn't necessarily fair to the community at large. The remainder of the site, as we've seen here, is occupied by surface asphalt. So these are all surface parking areas. And yes, they've been reclaimed in certain spots to act as patios. The general nature of these areas is surface parking. And then we've got these gaps in our urban blocks, which is, again, something that we're looking to avoid when we're dealing with important areas of our streetscapes. There is a small area of green space at the northern boundary of the site along Douglas, and then a small portion that comes down along Douglas with a couple of trees on it. We certainly respect this, and definitely part of our plan going forward was to promote and to bring more green space into the development. So when we analyze the site and we try to figure out what key elements are currently in the context and what elements we'd like to bring forward, it really relates to understanding the site and bringing out a bunch of ideas. So immediately we identify areas. So these red lines here identify areas of heavy volume, busy streets. So we have Springfield coming down, and then of course Beechwood. Both of these are very well-traveled streets, lots of vehicle traffic, bus traffic. And so the intersection of these two streets is a really important condition as far as we're concerned architecturally. This is a corner that needs to be celebrated. This is a corner that needs to be given back, and we need to have some public space in this area. We really do like the cadence of the buildings that we have here. So it's important to us too that when we're articulating the ground plan and articulating the buildings that are along Beechwood, this isn't a monolithic building. This has to be a building that has different facets, that has bumps, outs and ins, so that it kind of mimics or harkens back to the idea of a neighborhood that was comprised of a series of smaller buildings as opposed to one gigantic building that's going to be occupying the entire city block. Also important to us here too is the connection and establishment of really well-connected cycle tracks and active modes of transportation. We have worked at length with city staff on the active modes of transportation in front of this site and trying to determine a number of different ways to get cycle tracks to be integrated into the site and work with current and constantly evolving design standards. And then we've got as well a desire for a green buffer in the site. So having street trees in front of the building is a critical element for as far as the design team is concerned. Day one. The other element that we want to do with the project is to enhance the public realm. So promoting the cycle track, adding the green area in front, and then pushing the buildings back so that we have access for a proper width sidewalk, proper public realm, something that's gracious, something that's inviting, something that's generous, that allows for the kind of interaction that we would expect to see along a busy urban street is of critical importance. Finally, when we look at the difference between these two streets, so they're close in proximity, but the character of Douglas is distinctly different from the character of Springfield. And for that reason, we see things like businesses, we see commercial space, we see entrances to the building, we see vehicular entrance to the building along Springfield. Whereas on the Douglas side, it's much more about trying to bring residential units down into Douglas. So this in the project is where we find units that are actually at grade, that have doors to the street, that have porches in front of their units so that a resident could sit and actually interact with people walking down the street. So when we look at the site plan that we've developed, we can see an integrated cycle track. We can see this green buffer in front. We can see street trees that have been planted in front of the building. One of the most important parts of this project in my mind is this plaza that we're offering. So this is area that would otherwise have been developable, but we're actually pulling the building away from the corner here so that we can offer a really valuable piece of outdoor public or outdoor space, patio space, opportunities for interaction. And we've understanding that this is a busy intersection, we've actually got an extension. So we'll see this in the rendering, an archway that extends from the building to provide a buffer. And this is meant to improve ideas of separation, of privacy, and to make this space much more comfortable for people to sit down and to actually use. You know, we don't like to design public spaces and open spaces if they're not going to be used. Those are worse than not even providing them. So we need to not only allow for them to exist, but to design for them in a way that is going to be comfortable for people to sit down and make them actually want to use these spaces. Then we've got 4 commercial units that face Beechwood Avenue. Each one of them has outdoor space. So there's always these pauses. So we have extensions or areas where the building runs tight to the edge of the sidewalk, but then there's areas of pause where the building pulls back. So we have plazas on both corners. We have these ground-oriented units here. And then on the other side of the building is the main entrance into the building, as well as the entrance into the underground parking. Our kind of back of house functions, that'll be things like garbage, bike storage, is at grade. It's around the side of the building. So this really isn't a drive aisle so much as it is just hardscape. We don't imagine any vehicles coming down in here, but we do see this as a place where people would have access into the building, where we'd have opportunity to bring, you know, practical things like garbage bins out of the building and have them sit before custodial staff can move them back in. And then around the inside corner is where we'd find some outdoor amenity space, an amenity lounge. These would be raised planters. This would be a planting bed. And we're actually designing the planting bed to have soil volume sufficient to actually support the planting of trees. So if we look at a comparison between where we are currently with surface parking, with buildings projecting beyond property lines, with no green space in front, no street trees, versus the proposed development where we're seeing this green space, we're seeing this raised and separated bicycle track, we're seeing these public areas at the corners. You know, we're seeing treatment of landscape around property lines. We definitely get a clear idea that these principles that we looked at when we first started looking at the site are being well integrated into the design of the building. The mention of trees was something that was hard to ignore with some of the comments that we got back. So yes, there are going to be 9 trees that are lost. They're mainly along this north property line on the Douglas frontage, or sorry, on the Douglas address. So the north property line around here. But I'm blowing this up, this plan in particular, to show the extent of planting, both in front of the units along Douglas, the 4 trees that we have planned along Beechwood, the fact that the area between the cycle track and the sidewalk is intended to be soft landscaping. So this is sod or some other type of ground cover. 2 trees along Springfield by the entrance of the building, and then 3 trees in the rear area in a raised planting bed with any number of other plants that are going to be going into these raised beds here. So the approach here is very much about increasing to a large degree the amount of planting, the amount of vegetation that we see around the building, especially in comparison to the current condition. So as a kind of a compare and contrast slide, we can see that we've got these 9 trees here that are being lost, and we're replacing them with 9 trees, but in far more prominent locations that are going to be able to give back to the project and give back to the community as well. The other comment that we heard was about retail space, and I just want to be clear on this as well. So while it's easy to compare number of units to number of units, I don't know that this is necessarily the best way to look at kind of the before and after from a commercial perspective. While there may have been more number of units in the current condition, we'd be looking at spaces that aren't optimal. We'd also be looking at ceiling heights that are certainly suboptimal to commercial uses. And as we mentioned before, none of these spaces are barrier-free accessible. The other element is that none of them really house their own waste. So all of this results in garbages that are, stored in the surface parking area, that are open to the elements, that are visible. The solution that we've got with this design is that all of these units are accessible. All of these units have over 11.5 feet clear. We're looking to increase that if we can. And all of these units would have access to a common corridor leading to the storage of waste inside the building in cooled environments, so that there is no impact on the neighborhood. There's no pest problems. There's none of the other problems that happen with having waste stored outside. So we're very mindful of this. And the net difference in terms of the retail space that we're actually offering is less than 1,000 square feet. So, we're at 638 square meters in the proposal, whereas the current space being allocated is 721. So we're not a million miles apart in terms of the amount of retail space is being offered here. These are the floor plans. I'm going to flip through these relatively quickly because they're less impactful to everything we're talking about. 41 parking spaces below grade. There is no parking at grade, so any parking space here is underground and hidden from view. We've talked about the ground floor use, resident lobby, garbage rooms, bike storage room at grade, and residential units facing Douglas and the commercial units. Then we climb up the building. There is an amenity space and an amenity room. We were careful to locate this along Springfield and not along Douglas, so that the residents at Douglas would not have people standing in terraces looking over their rear yards and looking into their private space. This is oriented towards Springfield intentionally, so it's a more public area. And again, this is where it serves to activate the street frontage as opposed to take away from a resident's privacy in their rear yard. As we climb up from there, the building tapers in and continues to taper in as we climb higher and higher. Before we get to, this is level 7. And so it's called an 8-story building. We're really a 7-story building. We have a small pocket that goes up to 8 floors. And the only way that we're doing that is by making a few of these units right in the top corner here, 2-story units. And the reason we have to do that is because we do have the NCC view sheds. So there's protected views from the cemetery, from 2 points, the National Cemetery looking towards Parliament Hill. And so we've been extremely careful with how we plan this building to ensure that we meet all the height restrictions here. And so this area of the building is able to pop up, but the elevators cannot. And so we need to be able to provide elevator to every floor of the building. So the only way that we're able to use this space is to make these units 2 stories and have a stair inside a suite to get up to that height. But this is kind of the overarching standard that we need to meet. So there are 2 points in the National Cemetery, and they have protected view shed to the base of Parliament Hill. And so we've engaged our surveyor to plot these points. They're far more precise than we're able to be, and we can't get this wrong. So we have them come through and then provide this very detailed, basically grid work of elevation points. These are all topographic elevations that we then brought into our modeling software, and we create view cones or planes to ensure that we don't exceed any of these height restrictions. So it's hard to map this because it's not just a flat plane. It's actually kind of a bit of a V shape. It's like an open book in a way where the spine is lower, because why make it simple? So we really have to kind of work through this in a very particular way, a very precise way. And I can speak confidently that we have, stamped sort of surveyor's drawings authenticating the height requirement on the site, and that we meet all of these height requirements. Right. So then in terms of the articulation, in terms of the mass of the building, so this is a kind of an aerial view that's a composite of what's existing currently. This we've modeled in 88 Beechwood to give an impression for height. And then, of course, the subject property right here and our proposed design for the project. And what we want to notice here is that this is a really busy building from a visual perspective compared to how we typically design buildings. And this is because we didn't want this to feel like one building. Faces of buildings don't even line up. So this white element here is not perpendicular to this brick element here. And that is intentional because going from the history of, the buildings that sit on site and how none of them really look super square when they're built. So we're trying to reference that and make this building feel really like a collage of a series of different projects come together, as opposed to one gigantic structure that's being inserted on site. And then you can actually see right here what we're talking about with this archway that's protecting the plaza as well. So if we look at a ground level render, what we've got is masses and portions of the mass of the building that are done in red brick that reference back to some of the other structures in the neighborhood. Our detailing and our attention to detail in this project is part of the elements that we feel are really going to make this project successful. So we're being particular with the way that we're treating brick detailing, archways, soldier courses, really, really difficult masonry detailing to execute properly, but we feel is very important to making sure that it reads and it references the character of the neighborhood. And then we have that set against things that are very much smooth, modern, and really intended to create a juxtaposition between the two. It's important that we build buildings that are of our time, and that we do make reference to the history that exists in the site and in the context that we're building in, but they can't just be nostalgia pieces that are, trying to recreate the past, because that's also disingenuous. So we're trying to live somewhere in between, where we're making comments to the future, that we're being respectful of where we are now, and we're also remembering where we were before. And so we talked about this corner, this plaza, and celebrating this corner. So we have this archway that extends beyond, offering a buffer, offering an area of protection to help make this space feel more comfortable, more occupiable, more engaging. And that's set against a more modern element here that doesn't have the level of detail and articulation. But what we do find in here is a horizontal band that steps to 2 different heights. And this is intended to bring us from this 4-story line right here and bring us up a story to help lift us up at the corner. This is the only part of the project that doesn't step back. And the reason we do that is we feel like it's really important to highlight these corners. So we've moved the entire building back, but kept that wall straight, as opposed to offering step backs, to really reinforce this corner and highlight its importance. Springfield and Beechwood are really important streets in New Edinburgh. We need to focus on that, but we can see every other element, every other part of the project, it steps back. So the zoning calls for a step back at level 4. We comply with that here. We step back higher here, but the reason for that is we have hydro wires that force us to step back at a lower level. but then we do an additional step as we get higher. So we're certainly not trying to take advantage, and we're actually stepping back in the end more than we have to. But we're just doing this a little bit differently to work around existing infrastructure. When we look at the building from the other side, so this is at Douglas looking down Beechwood, we can see that whereas in the one corner we had this white stone element with really clean lines, we've now got archways with soldier courses on top of the arch, soldier courses on top of this mass. And again, we're trying to make more traditional references here with the way that we're treating the building. And then as we turn the corner and go back into a residential use, we're switching materials again to say, this is something different. This isn't commercial use anymore. And using archways as a device to say, these are entrance points to the building, entrance points for people's suites, and offers these planters and these breaks to offer some privacy for people on their front porches. So again, this is the elevation along Beechwood. And again, so we're talking about the differences in mass, the differences in architectural treatment, kind of the modern versus the more traditional aesthetic, and the fact that we pull these apart so they really start to feel like a series of component parts that are being stitched together. And this is the view along Springfield. So we can see this band that we've got that extends out into the archway here. And what we've done here is actually set the overhead door to the underground parking back, because we don't want that to be a part of the elevation. We want all of this to be set back so that what you read is this beautiful stonework, this terrace that we've got on the second floor. And again, much more traditional lines that we'd see than what our firm would typically do, trying to make reference to the area that the project is located in. And so here's a street level render of how this plaza on the corner could be developed, how engaging it could be, and how we're working with all the infrastructure for cycling and for sidewalks. Here's a street level render looking halfway down the block. So this is that smaller plaza that we got at mid-span, how we might be able to purpose these storefronts, street trees in front of the building. This is at the corner, again, at Douglas and Beechwood. And we can see this transition between commercial use and residential use. And then again, looking more down Douglas. And so the edge of the commercial and then leading into these at-grade units that would have a door to the street. Two more slides, then I'll stop, I promise. So this is similar to what Arjan was talking about. So this is kind of our method or thinking about managing transition of height and using the mass of the building to step in different areas to help step the building up and manage low-rise versus high-rise contexts that's on either side of the site. I think it's important that buildings don't all just have the same height, that we kind of play around with height and step of the building from project to project and block to block, because that's what makes cities cities and not suburbs. And then looking at color palettes as well. So color palettes of existing buildings in the neighborhood and how we can apply those same colors into the project. And that's really been a basis for the project as well, is understanding that materiality and applying it to the project. And then I'll just leave here. So these are 3 vignettes. They speak to the level of detail, the level of articulation, level of massing that we've really spent a lot of time considering and perfecting, because we feel like it shows that we're not considering this to be kind of a standard multi-unit residential building. This building is very much of its place, very much of its time, and couldn't be built anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And now I believe we will have a presentation from city staff.
Thank you, Councillor. Just looking at the shared button and I'll find my screen. You just confirm that you're seeing PowerPoint presentation, zoning and site plan. Thank you. So in the interest of time, I know we want to save a lot of time for question and answer. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. And if there's any clarification needed, I'm happy to take questions at the end or through the chat. But just a reminder, everyone, my name is Andrew McCrate. I'm the manager of Development Review Central. I'm with the City of Ottawa. So we're the team and my staff are the ones responsible reviewing the planning applications before us. So the development that the applicant team just went over is subject to 2 applications at the moment. We have a zoning bylaw amendment and a site plan control amendment. We're processing those applications concurrently. So I'm going to give you a high-level summary of what to expect in those applications and where we are currently in that process. So when a zoning bylaw amendment application comes into the city, it's submitted, the application fee is paid by the owner and applicant, and then we make sure that the necessary plans and studies to evaluate that application are submitted along with that application, and that would be what we call our deemed complete review. So do we have enough information to make an informed decision on this application? Once we get past that point, we provide a community heads up to registered community groups as well as the ward councillors so that they have the high level information of an application that's just been submitted and deemed complete in case those respective groups start getting public inquiries. And then we move into the application process itself, which is for a zoning bylaw amendment, they're always subject to public consultation, and site plan applications, most are subject to public consultation, but in all cases, they're all posted on our website, ottawa.ca/devapps, which if you're not familiar with that, I will put it in the chat after my presentation. So going back to the zoning process, what you'd expect to see when an application is submitted is there'll be on-site signs posted on the property to provide public awareness that an application has been submitted. It'll give you a summary of the proposed development, as well as a means of submitting comments and seeing more details through our DevApps website. Once this happens, we generally have a 28-day circulation period where that information is cast out to the general public, technical agencies, community organizations, the ward councillors, property owners within 120 meters of the development site will receive notice. And that's the initial touch point to say an application's been submitted and we're inviting you to submit comments on the application. As an option, the councillor has the ability to do a councillor-led community information session, which we're doing at this very moment. So thank you, Councillor King, for that. And usually we try to coincide that along with our comment period or shortly just after. So this meeting is taking place shortly after our comment period that ended in, I think it was the mid or end of October. So we're in good shape until in terms of taking feedback from interested community members. Once staff go through the process of considering all feedback, we'll provide a summary of comments to the applicant for consideration. And if there's any issues to work through, we'll go through an issue resolution period. And the goal is to work through that and then ultimately bring a report to the standing committee, which in this case would be Planning and Housing Committee. The Planning and Housing Committee meeting is the statutory public meeting for a zoning bylaw amendment application. And it's important to note that I know there's a lot of residents on this call and there's been a lot of community engagement on these applications. But if you want to receive formal notice from the city side, you have to make sure that you have submitted comments or engaged with our staff through the proper channels. So things like submitting a comment through ottawa.ca/devapps or contacting the file leads on my team, which in this case are Eric Forehand and Jack Smith, many of which you I'm sure have already engaged with so far, and I'll put their information in the chat afterwards. So once staff is ready to make a recommendation, we prepare a report that goes off to Planning and Housing Committee. That meeting for this particular application has not yet been set, but based on our timelines, you would expect it to see something probably in early in the new year or in the new year. So when it goes to Planning and Housing Committee, staff are ultimately making a recommendation on what the application should do. Should it be refused? Should it be approved? If it's being approved, what are the details of those zoning? How are we securing setbacks? How are we securing height? How are we securing details in the development that are important from zoning? Ultimately, that committee will make a recommendation to council, and then council will make the final decision, at which point a notice of decision will go out to start the 20-day appeal period. Property owners as well as public agencies generally will be the groups that have appeal rights. So quickly going through this. So similarly, the site plan follows a similar process, and in this case, we receive the applications concurrently. So both the zoning and site plan are being reviewed at the same time and sort of moving along together, but ultimately the zoning will proceed to committee and council before we make a final decision on the site plan application. And similarly, the site plan, we receive application, we receive our fee payments, and we make sure we have the right details, so plans and studies to deem the application complete. We give communities a heads up. There's a sign posted on site. And then we start that circulation process with internal experts technical agencies, community organizations, the ward councillor. It's a big group that goes into this process. And there's also that optional community-led information session. Again, that's where we are tonight. And once the site plan is processed to an extent where there's no further issues to resolve, and this would happen after the zoning goes to committee and council, then staff will prepare a report and conditions of approval. Ultimately, a site plan application cannot be refused, but you can have conditions that regulate how that site is to be developed. So that will happen after the decision of the zoning, and a site plan application has to be zoning compliant, which is why the zoning goes first and then the site plan. So I'm going to leave it there, Councillor, in the interest of time, but happy to take any questions, and I'll monitor the chat for any process related questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just briefly, we will toss it over to Nat Carey over at the BIA just to provide some input and some context.
Thank you, Councillor. I will be brief. I've been following the chat and I know that there's a lot of unanswered questions. The BIA, as many of you know, considers themselves the custodians of the main streets. We think about things like walkability and shopping and what the experience is on that main street. We animate the main street. We're responsible for things like acoustic and beach fest. And so when these files come up, they're very important to us. We immediately flagged when we were aware of this file that 7 businesses would then be replaced by 4. And we have since met with the architects and the developers and have had a little bit more clarity on that. I understand that they are very open to a lot of the conversations that are required to make sure that that many of our businesses are maintained. We also concur with the fact that though some of these buildings are being used, we have seen end-of-life buildings become problematic. You know, BB's, for example, was forced to move out of a building that is now re-inhabited by another building, by another business that may have issues. And we also understand that this particular owner is also an investor in 3 of the 7 businesses affected, and therefore has every vested interest to make sure that restaurants like Schoolhouse and Edinburgh certainly survive and thrive in our community. So we are confident that this is the right kind of developer that has been listening. We also understand that in order for businesses to survive on the main street, it requires density, and that the people in our community first and foremost require housing. We were very happy to see 3-bedroom housing units, which is not something that we see with all developers, which is much more conducive to our families and to different types of living situations that we have in this day and age and requirements. And so though we still have some concerns and some questions, and we will be working closely for the next little while with this particular developer on the needs of businesses, we do fundamentally currently support this development.
Thank you so much for those comments. And now we will move towards the question and answer period. I'm going to ask Erin McCracken to serve as our moderator for this element. So please, if you want to ask a question, please start to raise your hand, and Erin, in order, will call on you to ask your question. And like I said, we have the applicant as well as city staff here available to ask your questions about the development itself, as well as around the planning process. So we invite you to ask questions now by using the raise hand function. And I think Diane had physically raised her hand, so maybe we can go to her first.
Yes, that's because I'm not seeing a raise hand function at the bottom of my screen on this current Zoom. I'm familiar with it on normal Zooms, but it's just not there right now.
Just quickly, for people who might encounter that issue, it's typically under reactions. But
okay,
please go
I
ahead.
didn't see it. Sorry, Ralston. My biggest concern is the loss of the existing trees. Mature trees provide us with air filtration, and they last a long time. And from my experience, wherever we've been promised the same number of trees to replace, it doesn't happen. And there is a city bylaw against chopping down trees of a certain size. And those trees that are existing along beside the adjacent Douglas property are big trees. They should not be taken down. That is obscene as far as I'm concerned. And if you just replace them with little saplings, they're not going to provide the same shade. They're not going to provide the same air purification for years. My second concern, and I'd like this to be noted, is the businesses that are currently existing, like Dante Restaurant, are businesses that are well used by the community. They've invested in infrastructure to open their businesses. They're providing a wonderful service in our community. And my concern is, how long are they going to be shut down for? And to what extent will the developer reimburse them for all their retrofitting that they have to do to have kitchens and all the things that they currently have? We're going to lose a wonderful little resource there. And so I'm concerned. I mean, some of these places have 3-year leases. When will they have to close down? And what is anybody going to do to reimburse them? We all know from the Lansdowne Park experience that if that development stops, the city is going to have to reimburse all those businesses for their lost revenue for the time during the whole construction period so that OSEG can make a whole lot of money. So those are my concerns, the trees and what happens to the existing businesses that are there and how will we help them survive? Thank you.
Hi, Councillor, I'm sorry, I'm just going to cut in because this was part of the points that I wanted to make and I shortened them. But those businesses, Dante specifically, Schoolhouse and Edinburgh, we're all aware that this development was potentially happening when they set up shop and they are working directly with them. So I just want to clarify that those businesses were aware when they signed a lease that this development may or may not happen. And we are working very closely with them. Certainly Schoolhouse absolutely was informed, as was Edinburgh and Dante's as well. The other 4 are slightly different circumstances, but my understanding is the owner and developers are working very closely to make sure that they are doing right by these businesses. And the other factor that I meant to bring up is that there's currently some vacancies on Beechwood. So there are areas where some of those businesses can move to, and there's certainly a lot of new developments on Montreal Road and within the catchment in general, where we feel quite strongly that at least the majority of these businesses can thrive. Sorry, I will leave it at that.
Okay, Natalie, but to set up a restaurant, you have to have a full kitchen. You've got to have
very
all
aware.
the facilities. Who's going to pay for that? Because they've already retrofitted to do that.
I don't believe these are answers that we can give.
I think, I spoke to them today. They had not
who?
consulted. I did.
I was on the phone with Kareem today, so from Dante's. So I'll leave it at that, but they are consulted.
The other element of the question, I believe, dealt with trees. So I was just wondering, Andrew, whether you could speak to that.
Thanks, Councillor. It's certainly a comment we're well aware from the community, and also similarly through internal channels. Trees is important in all aspects, and it's also duly supported by our official plan in the urban tree canopy. There's, like I said earlier in the chat there's been no decisions made at this point, so it's part of an application that's under active review, and it's definitely part of our review. So there has been a proposal for removal of trees. There's been a proposal to look at replacement trees along Beechwood, Springfield, and I think one on Douglas. So it is top of mind, but we don't have an answer at this point. So it's part of the review process.
Thank you for that. And I think I'll shift back to Erin to moderate the incoming questions.
We have a question, I believe, now from Diane Harper.
Yes. My question is about the sidewalks and the bike lanes. I'm also a member of Bike Ottawa, as well as being a local resident and a pretty heavy user of the lanes along Beechwood. And I looked at it and I'm not convinced from what I can see that we're not going to be forced into traffic before going on to the new cycle track, which I think looks great. The presentation today was actually clearer than what I had seen earlier, but I just wanted to understand if I could get some more clarity on both the sidewalk widths and how that cycle track is going to go, because I think those are really important aspects of making it part of a walkable community. Thanks.
Okay, I can try to field that one. Or Murray, do you want to grab that? You're on mute, Murray. You're on mute. There we go.
There we go. Thank you. Whoever unmuted me, thank you. Can everybody hear me? So with respect to the cycle track question, that is a work in progress. We are working with staff and traffic people to understand exactly what the cycle track will look like when this project goes forward. It'll be an interim arrangement until such time as the city themselves invest in the final improvements that are necessary at the various intersections for the cycle track to be continuous through the intersections. But we are working through that with the city as we speak. With respect to the width of the sidewalk, Ryan, I'm not sure if you can advise what the width of the sidewalk is across the front of the building. I'm guessing it's 2 meters, but maybe you know more specifically.
I believe 2 meters is the number. Yep.
And if that concludes that answer, I think David is next with his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for holding this meeting. I mean, I appreciate the comments that what's currently on the site is out of date and is going to need to be replaced at some point in time. But we live on Douglas Avenue, just up the street from this new development. It's my understanding that we wouldn't be here today if the developer was willing to live within the rules that have been set for the site in the zoning bylaw and in terms of the official plan. As we understand it, you could build a 6-story building there. And you could respect the setbacks that are set out in the official plan. And the reason that we're here today is because the developer is trying to get out from under those rules. And while there are a number of nice elements that we heard the architect talk about, the building that is being proposed here is, in our opinion, far too massive for the amount of size of that lot. Yes, there are other 8-story buildings on the street, down at the one across the street at 88 Beechwood, or the Chartwell, or the Minto one down at McKay, but those are larger pieces of land. And this is like trying to put a size 8 foot in a size 6 shoe, and it just doesn't fit. The mass is larger than it should be. It's going to, in our opinion, create a canyon-like effect down Beechwood, like you see in some of the worst parts of Westboro. We very much share the concern about the loss of the businesses. I don't know exactly what we do to have the developer ensure that they're giving affordable rents to the businesses. But the businesses that we're going to lose if this development rushes ahead represent half the restaurants along Beechwood Avenue. What kind of village is it going to be if half the restaurants disappear? And maybe we'll get, maybe we'll get a chain store in that can afford the high commercial rents that are going to be here. But what I think is much more likely is we're going to see 5 years of vacant commercial space like we see down at the LCBO next, down close to Vanier Parkway. So I think the developer should go back to the drawing board. I think you should try and fit within the official plan that and the rules that are there. I have no idea what that does to the math of the amount of money that the developer's trying to make out of this spot. But I don't think this should be supported by staff, and I don't think it should be supported by the planning committee.
So, Councillor, I'll take a stab at that. My simple response to you, sir, is that the zoning bylaw is lagging behind the City of Ottawa official plan. The City of Ottawa, as many of you on this call will know, adopted a brand new official plan in 2022. The zoning bylaw dates back to 2008. So the zoning bylaw doesn't reflect or implement the policies and the directions of council in the new official plan. This project does not require an amendment to the official plan. What it does require is an amendment to the zoning bylaw to bring the zoning more in line with the vision for main streets such as Beechwood in the official plan. So that's what we're doing, is that we've designed a building that we believe is consistent with the policy direction of the official plan, and then bringing a zoning application to allow for the project to go forward. We've heard a lot, so that, just to be clear in terms of the nature of the application and why we're bringing a zoning application. We've seen and heard a lot of comments about the existing businesses. We can sympathize with the residents with their concerns about the loss of those businesses in the short term, but this site is going to redevelop. And when the site redevelops, those businesses will have to close. That's just the reality. Now, who moves back into the building once the building is complete? I don't think any of us have a crystal ball that's going to be able to answer that question. We're getting the message loud and clear that if there's a way for our client to provide for the existing businesses to move back into the building when it's completed, that message is loud and clear. If we can do that, we will. But there's absolutely no way this property is going to redevelop without those businesses closing. And this property is going to redevelop because that is the vision that your council has approved for Beechwood Avenue.
I think the next hand that's raised is Williams.
Yeah, thank you. I just have one basic point. I very much agree with David Orfeld. I live 200-300 feet further up Springfield from the new development. And I will be confronted with a solid blank wall. That's what all the residents further north in Springfield will see. I would like to see this proposal revised to fit within the existing zoning bylaws, 6 stories maximum, and the proper setbacks. The setbacks are a major element that is missing here. The net effect of the changes that the developers are asking for is that the building will be approximately 1/3 larger in mass than the zoning bylaw allows. It's going to be a huge monster. And all that they say about the visual effects of it and all the fancy design terms are basically trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. It will not look particularly nice, particularly for those of us who live on Springfield. Thank you.
Ryan, maybe you just want to speak briefly to the rationale for the wall on the north side of the building at Springfield.
So the zero setback line is completely within the setback requirements or allowances for the site. Like it's a TM zone, there's no issue with us having a zero setback there. We actually had the building pushed further away, and we had units that windows that looked north, and we revised this design because of comments that we had from the urban design review panel and their concern about exposure for these units. So we didn't have it this way originally. This was something that we did to help appease a concern from the design review panel, because this allows the units to look east and west as opposed to look north. Again, we'll do what we can for the brick mass articulation on the north property line along Springfield, but again, this is completely within setback requirements for the zone.
Furthermore, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Ryan, the immediate property to the north on Springfield is in the same zone.
Correct.
So
Yes.
there's an expectation that that view of that solid brick wall is a temporary condition until the property to the north on Springfield develops.
Thank you for that. I think that the next question, the next hand that is raised is Andrew's.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I've been around this game a long time at the Linden Lee Community Association. As far as I'm concerned, thank you for reminding me that the city has an official plan. I would have never known that. There's also a community design plan, which the adjacent communities were integrated into for the development of Beechwood. And I'm glad to see that at least there was a mention of it earlier in the presentation by the architecture team. So that's great. There's a vision for the city, but the official plan for the city has so far not delivered a lot of great visionary neighborhoods. What's happening in the city of Ottawa are these canyon streets that are being developed along the main streets. Anybody that wants to travel through one of those can just head west along Richmond Road there through Westboro, and you can see what Beechwood is going to become. And I just want to say the St. Charles development, that's a development that respected the idea of public space along Beechwood. It created essentially a park-like setting for public use. People are actually using that space. That was a sensitive development of a high-rise building along Beechwood Avenue. The Minto space, the new space on the south side of Beechwood, those are maximalist interventions for I guess the good of the property owners. And I totally understand that the Ontario Municipal Act allows people to do what they want on their properties, but there is a reason that you engage with the community associations. I'll stop there. I do have one other point. We heard from the Beechwood, I guess the business improvement area representative. I have not heard from the Beechwood Village Alliance, Linden Lee Community Association, Manor Park Community Association, New Edinburgh Community Association. Why were those groups not given an opportunity to speak tonight on behalf of the collective of residents in the area? And no one has to answer that question, that's fine. But the Beechwood Improvement, the Business Improvement Association that, is centered on Montreal Road, has not done a lot for the Beechwood strip. Thank you.
Yep. And I'll just briefly answer that. I mean, the circulation goes out to different community organizations they're in receipt, and many of the community associations do provide input on a regular basis on multiple development application files. I felt that with the interest concerning this redevelopment, that a specific session for residents was warranted. So rest assured that community associations are involved, that they would be contacted, that they can provide submissions, that some have provided submissions. But this was an opportunity for residents to provide direct input to the developers. And that also obviously informs my input and responses to the application. So that's the thinking here. So it's not to the exclusion of the community associations per se. This is to provide an additional inputs from residents who will be affected and impacted by the development. I think the next hand that's raised is Cecilia.
Thank you for offering this opportunity for us to express ourselves, and I hope that our expressions are somehow taken into account. My question is regarding I have two comments. One is, what are you doing with this chat that we are putting here? Is that part of something that you're going to collect, or these ideas? There are many. Not all of them are going to be addressed before 8 o'clock. So that's one question.
So I'll answer that just briefly,
yes,
since it's my office. That's what it is. We collect all the materials. The materials will be posted. We collect a transcript of everything that has been said, and we ensure that that's relayed to city staff. Like I said, it also informs my thinking and my comments and my input on the process as your representative. We try to take all comments, before I really take any specific strong position. We want to ensure that we hear from everybody, and that the process that we undertake also informs some level of change potentially on the application. So that's the thinking. So all the items will be recorded. If there are specific people who want to reach out to us as well to have specific answers, we will help facilitate that as well.
Okay. So secondly, I heard a lot about celebrating the corner, which I'm very happy about. But I also like to hear more about celebrating the sidewalk, because a number of people have remarked that the Springfield side of the sidewalk is very narrow. And you have put in that imaginary restaurant that you show us, and there is a man coming out with a bicycle. So, you gave us the perfect image in where the people in the sidewalk will have to either move to the street or stop or something, because you're getting someone with a bicycle that was having a nice lunch. So, it's really overcrowded, that sidewalk, the way that is shown in the design. I haven't heard specific measurements of what the sidewalk is, but I think that we have a concern about that. It provides a real place for stopping and talking and many other things that perhaps we are not contemplating, but a wide sidewalk is part of city living. And I find sidewalks very narrow on Springfield. Thank you.
Okay, this is a great question. Let me just share my screen. So this is instead of from the documents that we presented with, this is the actual site plan that has measurements on it. The sidewalk, as we're showing it, so along Springfield, is 2 meters wide. And in the area between the sidewalk and the edge of the building is 3 meters. So that's the better part of 10 feet. We're showing 2 bicycle parks. These are visitor bike parking spaces on the corner. They have to be on our property and on city property, which is why they're located here. But we're certainly able to provide everything that we've shown in here and everything that we've conveyed in the rendering based on the dimensions that we've laid out in this corner here. So a 2-meter wide sidewalk. So for people that go feet and inches, that's, I'm going to say about 6 feet 4 inches wide. And then we have another 10 feet from there to the edge of the building. And in that space, we've got some bike parking shown. Again, this is visitor bike parking. Might this move, of course, as we continue to refine the design. But the idea here is that this is all meant to be, this area in here is critical from our perspective to the project, that we're offering this back as patio space, a space for encounter, space for interaction, very much a community space.
Thank you for that response. I think the next hand that's raised is Peter's.
Hello, thank you for this. Appreciate the opportunity to provide my views, which are shared with a number of people I know who live in that area. We've lived here since about 1985. And we've had previous councillor wanted to increase the number of bike lanes for people, which was the popular wish at the time by many bikers. And the result was that the road got jammed and they had to change that. We've got to have space for cars, for pedestrians, and bicycles need to go in another area to get around it. Now, my concern with parking is there's, in my view, very little parking to help people going to that building or the restaurants in it for eating. And I wonder if you could explain that. And secondly, the spaces that you have for commercial purposes, will they be much larger than the current spaces of those tenants? And will you be keeping the rents at a reasonable rate? Because in the past, when we've had buildings built and the restaurateurs were unable to stay to pay the high rent that was charged by the owners, and would probably affect these places as well. And my other question about is commercial space. Sorry, the people living in the building, are they going to be able to tolerate dramatic movements from crowds coming to protest one or another type of government or personnel? Because we have a lot of those.
I'll take a run at the parking. And Ryan, please correct me if I get this wrong, because I've said it in the chat as well. The parking that we're providing, for the most part, is for the retail tenants and for visitors to the building. The amount of parking provided for the actual residents of the building will be extremely limited. The expectation is that the residents of the building will rely on transit or other modes of active transportation that will be available at the front door of this building. So there will be parking available for the retail tenants and for visitors of the building. And sorry, we're in no position to speculate on what the rents of that retail space will be once the building is complete.
And I was just going to say that you had referenced some of those questions that are in the chat. Just wanted to note that the applicant was also responding to some of the questions that could be addressed in the chat. I think the next hand that's raised is Shirley's. And I don't think that you've unmuted, Shirley.
There, now I've unmuted. Hello. Thank you, presenters and Rawlson King, for providing the opportunity to provide comments and also ask questions. It was a very good presentation. I've been a resident of Douglas Avenue for quite a long time, more than 40 years. So I've had a pretty good window on the evolution of the street and also Beechwood during the last many decades. I believe in change, and I think many of the people on this call believe in, you know, the need to evolve your community and also the need to increase, you know, housing, to, you know, have a perhaps bring up the density, and you know, certainly the buildings that are there now are kind of unsightly, and I for one am very pleased to know that a new development is going to be going in. So having said that, I still have concerns that aren't necessarily generated just by this particular development, but they're more cumulative in nature. It started with, and I think very much the Rockcliffe base development, and then, you know, we had the St. Charles development, we've had the Minto development, we might have the one across the street, we now have this development. So that's not your problem per se, I understand that. But what ends up happening is that your site, this site that you're talking about, is so unique because the context around it is quite different from a lot of other sites. I can tell you from, again, being a longtime resident, that the amount of traffic, you know, in and out that is generated by that intersection on the other side where the Quickie is in the metro, because of the traffic going in, the traffic going out, buses stopping, cars trying to turn left all over the place, bicycles. I would say that I'm a little surprised that there's not more of a traffic and a parking study that has that would have attended this particular application, because my main concern has to do with the amount of, I guess, proposed units, the amount of the under capacity, the number of the very few parking spaces that will be provided based on, you know, assumptions. And I can tell you again, as a resident of Douglas, they all park on our street. They park and they double park sometimes. They park in front of our driveways. That's, you know, and some of that goes with city living. So you know, that's just kind of sometimes what you have to deal with. But I really am concerned about destroying this wonderful idea of the main street by just adding too much traffic, adding too many more parked cars, adding too many points of entry and exit. It's actually become, in my view, a little bit of a dangerous area to live. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Again, my point is, you know, how comprehensive a parking and traffic study was done to accompany this particular proposal.
And I'll direct your question for a brief answer from Andrew.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Shirley, for the questions. So if you do navigate to the ottawa.ca/devapps, which is where the supporting material for the application filed, so that's the same material that city staff and technical agencies are reviewing, there is a transportation impact assessment. So that's very much part of our review. It's a very detailed transportation study that looks at the proposed development, things like how much parking are they providing, what are they doing to target different modes of use, so, you know, transit users, active bicycle, parking demand, that sort of thing. The thing that's unique about those studies is it's not necessarily specific to that development. It has to take into account the already existing patterns and any applications that are known and active in the surrounding area. So it's not viewed in isolation, it's viewed as part of the complete picture. And so my team on development review, while we have a lot of technical expertise, we do rely on a lot of other parts of the city, such as our transportation colleagues, who are broken down into, you know, signals, traffic, active transit. It's a big part of the review process. So short answer is very much part of the review and looked at it with each application.
Thank you so much. And noting that we are nearly at the top of the hour, our last question will come from Lynn. Like I had said before, as some of the questions that have come in the chat have been answered by Andrew and also by the applicant team. If there are any outstanding questions that you have, please forward them to our office for follow-up. But this evening, the last question will go to Lynn.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm concerned about two things. By the way, I just thought that it was so good to have this because I got an awful lot more information than just reading the application and seeing things online. So having real people talk to us about this is great. I'm concerned, as well as others, about the businesses being able to come back and be able to afford the rents. And one of the things that I think might be better is to create some smaller commercial units. So instead of 4 big ones, include a couple of smaller ones so that smaller businesses will be able to set up there, because they'll be more like the old storefronts. Number two is affordability of the rents in the apartment. And I'm wondering if the applicant and the consultants who are working with them have considered making an application to the city under the community improvement plan, where the city will subsidize some affordable units within and get the developer to agree in the early stages. It's complicated, but it might bring in a few affordable units. The city gives some financing and pays, I think it's like, I can't remember, the certain amount of money and a loan, and then the rents have to be kept at a certain level over 10, 20 years and so on. So I know that this is a commercial rental, it's not nonprofit, but I'd like to see if we can have a few affordable units, particularly for the families. Thank you.
Ryan, I'll let you go on this one.
Okay, sounds good. So first question about size of the rental units. For sure, we cut these things up just as a kind of a graphic and illustrative point. And so depending on market desire, market demand, we can certainly make these units smaller. We might amalgamate to make them bigger. Like, you never know, right? So that's certainly, we're early days for doing something like that. The idea more is to just illustrate what is potential or what's possible here. And then we let market factors kind of decide the final size of these things. So certainly hear you and hear the general comment here about concerns about affordability of these commercial units. There's enough in the chat about talking about opportunities and models that involve subsidy, and that's really not a sustainable game when we're looking at trying to properly lease out these spaces. To be perfectly honest, we deal with quite a number of multi-unit residential projects, and there's a lot that are on the shelf because financially they don't make sense to move forward with. So the days of developers coming in here and turning over ridiculous profits on projects doesn't happen in this current kind of financial reality that we're in. So a lot of these are market-driven decisions, and to think subsidies are going to get us there only lasts for a certain period of time and then they run out. What does happen, though, is that I've also worked with tenants that are looking at assessing which sites to move into, and the market conditions, the number of residents, the number of units, the demographics that surround particular areas do weigh in very heavily to where people decide to move into. So the net benefit to having these developments happen, and I'm not specifically talking about this one, but like seeing 88 Beechwood come online, seeing some of the other ones that have been planned come online, is that it does create a swell of demand, and that's certainly going to be the biggest factor that's going to help to get these commercial units rented out. I don't think we should be making the landlords the bad guys in this equation. As far as affordable housing units are concerned in the building, again, the financing conditions that we've got, the applicant is certainly looking at some of the financing options through CMHC as a lender, and part of that involves affordable housing units. Now, these are affordable housing units based on market factors and percentages of mean household income. So this is all kind of a formula based on, you know, average income is this, and so your rent can exceed no more than this percent to be deemed affordable. And there will be a number of those units in this project that will meet that threshold. But to be frank, you know, those are going to be your smaller units in the project. So that's kind of what creates that threshold. Otherwise, you know, there could be opportunity to pursue some of the city's initiatives for affordable rents, but that's going to be a financial decision that gets made in due time.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I want to thank everybody for their taking a good chunk of their evening out to participate in this information session. I thought it was very important that we hear from you, our residents. Like I said before, we have been hearing from other community associations and organizations, but it's also important that we give an opportunity for you to provide inputs on this development. There was a lot of interest, so we thought it would be very important to take advantage of the optional option that councillors have to have an information session on this file. We are going to continue to take input from you. So please feel free to reach out to my office with specific comments or concerns. You can do that by sending an email to rito.rockcliffeward@ottawa.ca. And please feel free to reach out as well to planning staff who's still collecting input from the public on this file. We appreciate the time that you have taken to be with us. And after we collect all of the data, then I will ensure that my views and final comments are known to the community on this file. But I can say without a doubt that I share many of the concerns that have been raised here tonight by residents, and we have been relaying those concerns to the applicant, and they have been receptive in terms of sitting down and listening to those concerns. So we want to continue with that process. You're really central to that, and you know, I thank you for your participation tonight. And I'll leave you with this as well. This session will be made available on my YouTube channel within a few days. It will be linked in the newsletter with more information as to how you can provide input on this application file. I'll leave it there for tonight. I wish everybody a wonderful night, and thank you for joining us this evening. Missy.
Councillor, just on behalf of the developer team, I want to thank you and your office for organizing this meeting this evening. I hope it was informative for your constituents and the constituents from the ward across the street from you who were able to join us. Thanks again for all of that. And there was a great turnout tonight, and I hope we were able to answer some of their questions. Thank you so very much.
Well, I thank you for your presence, and also for Andrew. The city staff works hard. They work long hours, and we appreciate all the work they do and the input that they provide in terms of the process to residents. So we appreciate both the applicant participating, city staff participating, and of course, most importantly, the residents of both Rideau Rockcliffe and Rideau Vanier who are interested and affected by this development. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.